All right. Good morning and welcome to another morning episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I am your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. All right. It is election season, and that means time for interviewing candidates. If you're a candidate running for office and you would like to have an opportunity on the show, head on over to candidates.libertydad.com. You can check out the link in the show notes and get yourself booked. You can also, I read that in the wrong order. Apologies, folks. But check out the link in the show notes. It'll be there. Available times are Tuesday and Thursday mornings at 7:30 a.m. and then Wednesday and Thursday evenings, 7:30 p.m. All times are Eastern Standard Time. And while I have a heart for libertarian candidates, Republicans and Democrats are welcome here too. Today's guest joins me from Texas to discuss his run for U.S. Senate. Please welcome Mark Sims to the show. Good morning, Mark. How are you?
Good morning, DL. It is so good to be with you, although
Awesome.
it is early.
It is. It's far earlier for you, although in fairness, I was up at 5 a.m. my time. So
Okay, I will cut you some slack then. Awesome.
yeah, I'm a little bit crazy like that, I guess. So let's dive right into it, good sir. Tell me who you are for, my benefit, the benefit of my audience. Tell us who you are and what inspired you to run for U.S. Senate.
Okay, glad to do that. Yes, so I'm an ordinary citizen. I'm a father, a grandfather, a longtime political aficionado, that just lived a standard normal life. As a young man, I thought I would enter politics early,
Mhm.
and had I done that, I think perhaps I would have been tempted to make it a lifelong hustle, like so many in this area do. But I think God had other plans,
Mhm.
and I ended up just living a normal life. But I've reached a point in my life where there's a window that I can take the passion for reform and
Mhm.
liberty and enter into the marketplace of ideas and discuss it. By background, I went to the military academy. I served in the Army 4 or 5 years. Did the normal things that a young lieutenant and captain does. Then went into industry. Spent pretty much all of my professional career in the supply chain space.
Okay.
Um, and started out project management. Went on to become an entrepreneur. Started a software company. Sold it. Worked in and out of large corporations, mostly on the technology software side, but also consulting. Essentially, focusing on process, delivering value, making things work better. That's what I do. I'm an engineer, so
Okay.
I look at process and I make things work better.
Awesome. Well, we could use that in government. So tell me, why is it that you chose U.S. Senate versus any other position?
So my passion from a policy standpoint has always been kind of at the federal level. I wish it weren't so. I wish most of my life was impacted by local government to the extent that we need any government whatsoever.
Hmm.
However, the big issues in all of our lives, I think, seem to be coming out of Washington D.C. these days. So it's a little bit a take on Willie Sutton. What asked when he asked why he robbed the banks? He said that's where the money is, right? So I think I need to go and participate in the discussion in Washington because that's where the origin of most of our problems are, and that's where they can be solved. So the U.S. Senate seems like a place that I could add to the discussion. That's why I've chosen it.
All right, awesome. So I previously had your Libertarian opponent, which is infrequent for me to find two Libertarian candidates running for the same position, just because there's not that many of us. But your Libertarian opponent, Ted Brown, he was on the show a couple of weeks ago, and I
Yeah.
asked him the same question that I'm about to ask you. What makes you the better candidate when libertarians head to convention in April? Before you answer that, really quickly, just as a reminder to folks, states vary. In Florida, for instance, you can actually just, as long as you're registered with the political party, you can go ahead and run for any particular office. You don't have to have any coordination at all with the Libertarian Party. But I believe Texas, I believe you guys do because of your ballot access laws. So you actually go to the Libertarian Party of Texas's convention, and then you get nominated there. I'm correct on that, right? And then I
That's absolutely correct.
yeah, and then I think Georgia is another state that does something similar. So when the Libertarians are choosing between you and Ted Brown, why would they choose you over him?
Um, I think I'm an authentic native Texan with a lifelong commitment to liberty and freedom that can relate to Texans. First of all, I have tremendous respect for the Libertarian Party and particularly those that have carried the torch, if you will,
Mhm.
over all these decades and kept an option available, earned and retained ballot access. But I think it's time we message a little bit differently, perhaps.
Mhm.
We often say that Democrats voters go out and they pull Democrat or Republican, even though in their hearts they may would like to be independent, like to have other choices, but they always go back. And we say, well, that's a little bit insane. You do the same thing over and over again, you get the same results. I think libertarians have to do some introspection ourselves. If we keep sending the same candidates out with the same messaging approach, we're liable to be stuck in the 1 to 2% range forever.
Mhm.
And that's a formula for remaining a political protest movement, not for being an active political party. If you want to be in this business, you've got to be in this business with one intent, and that's to win,
Mhm.
to earn a seat at the table, to begin impacting public policy in a way that enhances freedom. I think I will put my credentials as a lifelong liberty loving citizen up against anyone's. I have not, as I indicated earlier, been a lifelong activist. Someone said a couple of days ago that Ted, and whom I have lots of respect for, we've met each other on a couple of different occasions,
Hmm.
has probably run for office more than anyone in Texas. Or he may have run for more offices than anyone that's currently living in the Libertarian Party, and it's been a 1 or 2% result. We've got to do something to change that. I believe that the Libertarian Party needs to become kind of inextricably linked to a broader narrative, and that is what I refer to as the broad-based reform movement. We have gotten less liberty in the 55 years that this party has been in existence. And we need to step back and do some introspection, ask ourselves, why is that so, and what can we do to change it? And that's a message that I would like to deliver to the delegates in Abilene coming up in April. I have strong ties to the military.
Hmm.
So Texas has 1.5 million or so veterans who vote at much higher rates. So I think I have an access into a segment of the population that Ted may not have. And I think that we've got a little bit of a unique situation here in Texas this time. The Republicans, by the time they get to a nominee, which will not occur until probably the end of May the 26th or so,
Hmm.
50, 60% of the Republican primary will not have had their first choice, succeed and be on the ballot. So that opens up a lane. And I think I can appeal to conservative people who are at heart liberty loving people. They just haven't had many choices. The primary system brings out the worst in both parties. I think we probably could both admit that. But I'm going to simply, I think, be a candidate that provides an alternative with a vision for the future, not been caught up in the distractions and the factions of the past.
Hmm. Gotcha. So one of Ted's claims is that, hey, he had been here, he's been with the party for quite some time. I think he joined the party before I was even born, if I remember correctly. And that was one of the things that he said was his strength, that he had been with the party for a very long time. And it sounds like you're saying, hey, one of your strengths here is that you're bringing a unique message that's a little different than, not necessarily Ted, but just in general, that's been put out there from other candidates. So can you give me an example of that difference between the message that you have or how you're delivering it versus past candidates, whether it be Ted Brown or just generically speaking?
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm focused less on the peripheral issues that seem to get all of the attention and more on the process. As I said, I'm a trained engineer.
Mhm.
As I step back and look at whether or not this country has realized its potential, the vision of the founding fathers, I mean, we've gotten close, but over time things have decayed. I use the phrase that natural law is actual real, right?
Mhm.
The second law of thermodynamics, it says over time, any system kind of decays into chaos. Look around and there's a lot of chaos. So things have
Mhm.
gotten broken. And I think it's time that we step back and took a kind of measured, reasoned analysis of what's gone wrong and how we should fix it. In other words, we've got a long list of contemporary issues that seem to crop up every 2, 4 years. They don't really change much because nothing ever gets solved. And so what we have to do is before we get to measured, pragmatic, reasonable solutions to our problems, I think we have to go back and fix the breakages in the body politic. So that's the message that I'll be delivering. I think that's much different than the traditional libertarian message of just issue by issue.
Mhm. Mhm. And we're going to talk about those here in just a moment. Before we do, I want to shift gears and talk about some of your other opponents. So the Republican hopefuls, they have, I don't know, it looks like 8 or so people. Who do you anticipate winning their primary?
That's a difficult one. It's kind of shifted. As early or as late as a couple 3 weeks ago, on the Republican side, none of the above was leading.
Mhm.
We've had the latest poll come out that suggests that Ken Paxton has kind of broken out a little bit outside the margin of error. So the suggestion would be that has a very good shot at prevailing by the time we get to late May. I don't think he'll be an outright winner on March the 3rd. Um, an incumbent with 24 years already in the Senate, Senator
Mhm.
Cornyn, at the level that he's at, it doesn't look good. Just traditionally, the young congressman, out of the Houston area, Wes Hunt. I thought he might break through. He's also a West Point grad
Mhm.
with a good, solid message, but it doesn't look like he's going to make it. But you never know, right? Uh, we'll let the voters decide on March the 3rd. Um, on the Democratic side, I believe that ultimately the strongest candidate for the Democrats would be the young legislator from Austin area, James Tallarico.
Mhm.
But the latest polls suggest that Congresswoman Crockett has got a several point edge in that race. Polls are what they are, and sometimes
Right.
they're notoriously long, and you never quite know if there's an agenda behind the pollster. So
Right.
I'll let the voters decide in those two parties what they want, and then I'll deliver a libertarian message if I get the opportunity. I mean, that's one thing. I don't take this race for granted. I understand and respect the activism and the efforts that folks like Ted and Wes Benedict and others here in the party in Texas have made for many years. But I don't take it for granted. Um, in the discussion that you and Ted had a few days ago, he mentioned me and then went on and said, I don't know who my opponents will be in the fall. He said that he's made that statement on a couple of other different podcasts. It's as though he doesn't think the delegates in Abilene really have a choice. I'm going to go out and earn the nomination if I get it. I take nothing for
Mhm.
granted. I have been traveling and meeting with the various county delegations and party organizations. I'll be in San Antonio tomorrow night. I'll be in El
Mhm.
Paso on Thursday. I'll be in the Dallas area on Saturday night to get out the message of reform. Let's bring a new dimension to the libertarian narrative.
Gotcha.
So, so,
Um,
so I don't know, but I'd be prepared to message against e- either or any of the above. Um,
gotcha. Let me ask you then, since Senator Cornyn is the incumbent and he is running again, what are his best and worst actions in your mind that he's taken?
I think his best actions is he's managed to get himself reelected over and over again. I mean,
Mhm.
so as a politician, he has been successful. His worst actions is that I think he believes he's an essential part of the Washington D.C. circuit, and that he needs to maintain a base of power, and he's the indispensable senator. I think that approach and that attitude has gotten in trouble. People do not believe that the current government is working for us.
Mhm.
It kind of keeps us at each other's throats. We kind of get ping ponged from one side to the other. The rage machine's always going. Something's always trying to get us upset with each other. So I think it's time that we set some of that aside and simply focus on the things that we have in common. So
Gotcha.
I think Senator Cornyn has had an opportunity. If in 24 years you haven't made your impact, you should probably step aside and let someone else have a chance.
Gotcha. Gotcha. No, I agree. And I think that I don't pay attention necessarily to the senators in other states so much. But I do start wondering about them when they've been in office for so long. All right. I'm going to jump over to I want to talk about the issues that, like on your website. Now, one thing that was very interesting that caught my attention, you have something on your site called Bill Reform, which looks like a set of 4 amendments to the US Constitution. So would you walk us through your bill reform idea and explain its purpose?
So let's do a little update on that. It's the bill of reform.
Okay. Yep.
Uh, and it's not four. There are kind of four topics listed up at the top, but there's actually 18 different draft constitutional amendments if you go
Okay.
down into the detail. And that's where the substance is. The four bullet points up at the top of that particular page are just kind of background and setting the stage.
Hmm.
I think, as I said before, after 235 years, we've developed a series of breakages in the body politic. I mean, the two-party system has evolved into this very contentious system. That was not George Washington and Jefferson's vision, I don't think. Um, we've got a permanent political class as opposed to citizen legislatures, which is, I think, was the original vision. I mean, used to you'd go and serve a couple, 3 or 4 terms. I actually did a plot of the number of senators who had stayed in office for more than like 30 years. And in the 1800s, it was one or two between 1800 and 1850.
Hmm.
In the 1900s, it was again 2 or 3, but we get to the 20th century and suddenly we have folks like Chuck Grassley, Strom Thurmond, Bobby Byrd, Teddy Kennedy squatting in Senate seats for 50 years.
Hmm.
That's just unacceptable. Think of all the talent and the energy and the good ideas in those states that never saw the light of day because people acquired power, they used power to stay in office, to enrich themselves, and to rule over us. And I think citizens are worried about that. So there are actually 18 constitutional amendments that I think that if were implemented, and each of them independently would be a valuable correction to a problem that I see in Washington, but
Hmm.
they're kind of designed to work together. That's the reason I titled them a bill of reform, a little bit of play on the rights. I understand the heavy lift that it takes to get a constitutional amendment passed.
Right.
On the other hand, we need permanent reform. We don't need things that can just be, here today and by fiat gone tomorrow.
Hmm.
Let's do the heavy lifting to do it right, and try to reset the course of this nation, kind of what I refer to as a national reset. We can start looking at them in terms of specifics. I don't know if you pulled them up there. There's a lot of effort and focus on election integrity.
Hmm.
Um, from the 2000 on, we continually had disputes about who won. We're an intelligent society. We know how to run elections. There are some people who want power at any cost. We have to guard against the loss of confidence in our electoral process.
Right.
If we lose that, we lose a lot. We may lose it all. We have to absolutely preemptively create election processes such that we get winners that are indisputable. Americans, we debate and we argue over all kinds of topics and we take different positions, and that's healthy. But
Hmm.
Americans, for the most part, are still fair-minded. They want to win fairly and squarely, and are prepared to respect the results. So there's a lot of interest in there around making sure that we have elections that are completely secure, that allow those who and encourage those who are eligible to participate. No one should be who's eligible to vote should be in any way prohibited or discouraged from voting. But we need to have more than just the official conduct of those elections. Um, I refer to something called the election cycle. When we first started this, I think Congress was probably seated, and the president took office, and that was March, right, following a November election. It took a long time to get to Washington, to rearrange, load up the horse and the carriage, and move to Washington. Those are issues and impacts of years gone by. Um, so what we've got today is we have an election in November, and then we see Congress in early January, and the president on the January the 20th. So we often have what's called a lame duck session. That's when Congress actually buckles down, and all the things that they refuse to deal with before the election, they try to jam down us because they're no longer accountable.
Hmm.
Losers shouldn't legislate. If you've lost an election, you should go home. You shouldn't have the ability to pass new laws after that. We've seen in a recent cycle, the 80 days from the election until January the 20th, a president essentially used the powers of Congress and the federal government to sabotage a successor. And I think you know what I'm talking about. So that shouldn't be allowed, right? We should have a peaceful transfer of power quickly. I mean, the Brits literally do it the same day, right? You see two limousines pull into the palace, and one resigns, and another pulls in 30 minutes later and gets the requirement to mandate to form a government. So we should be thinking about the election cycle. We have this continual um, continual campaign season, right?
Mhm.
Most democratic nations elect a new government after a 4, 6, 8 week campaign. We have basically unending campaign seasons, right?
Right.
We don't have a season for governing. And since there should be a time in which we focus and we compete and we let the marketplace of ideas win. And then when we get through, we should acknowledge the results and we should go to the work with whomever survives that process with the partners. And we should do good things for the country, not be in competitive campaign mode all the time. That's gotten this nation into trouble, and we should fix that.
Gotcha. So, so because when I looked at your site here, and I can actually pull it up for you if you, and you can kind of help guide me a little bit. Perhaps I was the way that I was looking at it or whatnot. So here we go. Is it up on the screen? Well, there we go. That's not what I wanted. How about?
Yeah,
Oh, there we are. We're
yeah,
at the bottom. I was looking for us. I thought we were going to be to the left of the screen. Sorry. Uh,
exactly. We
no, that's
disappeared.
okay. We're down at the bottom, and that's fine. So
Yeah,
you've got
the ideas are a lot more important than us anyway, so it's all good.
sure, fair enough. So we've got this bill of reform here, right? 28th Amendment, 29th, 30th, 31st, and you said there are actually 18 in
Yeah,
your region. So let me
that's just
let me
the sample, right? I just was
right.
just showing
Okay.
a document as an image, but you have to scroll down to see the full list.
Okay. Okay. I see what you're getting at here. So let me ask then for 18 is much more challenging, as you've already acknowledged. How do you plan to convince two-thirds of the House and then three-quarters, and the Senate, and then three-quarters of the states to pass not one and not even my initial understanding of four, but 18 amendments? That seems like quite like on top of just getting a single amendment passed. That seems like a tremendous task. It almost feels like we're getting a brand new constitution. How do you convince
Well,
Congress
well,
and the states to do this?
Okay, yeah. So I acknowledge right up front that this is a heavy lift.
Mhm,
Doing anything that's worthwhile is 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 not easy. Look at the current state of the House and Senate right now, right? In the
mhm,
House, you've got essentially a 1-2 vote margin, depending on who shows up that day. And so it's right on the knife's edge. The Senate is slightly different, but not much, three or four vote margin in between the two. There is an active effort in Washington by a group right now to elect independent and third party candidates that would caucus with neither party. In other
mhm,
words, the price of allowing both chambers to organize into their committee heads and do the kinds of things that need to be might be to extract some concessions. I have been asked to participate, although I'm clearly not the party nominee. I'm not laying claim to that. They saw what I proposed here on the Senate side. They're essentially running the exercise primarily focused on the House, but they picked up this content from my website. I spent 3 days in Washington last week reviewing this with them. The strategy is to go in and kind of have a force multiplier, saying, yeah, and by the way, we need more than one independent senator. This is
mhm,
true, but in spite of what you might think, there are real patriots in the Congress, right?
mhm.
Um, they tend to go up, and alone they get sucked into the system, and they have to go along to get along. It's actually much worse than most citizens realize. I was talking last week with an ex-congressman, and I'm not going to say who it is, and he says, it's never really explicitly stated, but it's understood that by the time a key vote comes up, you either vote the way a big special interest wants, or they're going to drop a $5 million contribution on an opposing PAC in your next primary. It's
Right.
just that blatant. New congressmen, new senators go in, there's a price list to get to get appointed to a given committee.
Right.
You have to promise to earn so many millions or hundreds of thousands of dollars to get on the Ways and Means Committee, which then gets converted over to the leadership PAC, right? So that they can then spread that around in the next election cycle, pushing people that will put them back in leadership. It's kind of an incestuous, invirtuous cycle that we've got going on. So I want to go to Washington and completely say, I'm not going to participate in that. I would be looking for fellow patriots that are prepared to shake things up. First of all, an independent senator, whether it's Ted Brown or myself, would be an earthquake, right, in Washington, D.C. If a large state like Texas came and said, look, the people have had enough, and we would like things to change, and the price for us for playing and going along with this process is that you have to consider, these amendments. My personal requirement would be I would like all 18 of these amendments to be put on the Senate floor by roll call vote individually and collectively. Would they pass in the 120th Congress? Perhaps not. But we would quickly identify who was serious about cleaning up the government and who wasn't, and then that would give us a strategy to move forward and start looking at candidates who could join the effort in the cycles in 2028, 2030, 2032. It's not going to be an overnight thing. I mean, think of how long the Convention of States has been going. They started in 2010 or 12, kind of came out of the Tea Party movement. I engaged early with that group because I believe that permanent reform is something we need. Eventually kind of split off from the effort with Mark Meckler and company because their amendments are a little bit vague. They want term limits, but they don't tell you how many. They want a balanced budget, but they don't really say what are the rules of the balanced budget. And then they have this kind of unclear, reduce the size of government. It's kind of a conservative right-wing approach. I think it should be much more balanced. For example, I mean, the specific issue that I broke with Convention of States over was campaign finance reform. The real problem in Washington, D.C. is just the unlimited amounts of money sloshing around, buying favoritism. The citizens don't really participate in that process. We have a government of special interest, by special interest, for special interest, and so we have to take the money out. And one of these amendments is a very simple, elegant campaign finance reform that says you should be allowed to contribute to a candidate for office if you can vote for the office. So just think about that. No labor, no business, no PAC money, because they can't vote. Split political money into two categories. One being issues, and as long as it's fully transparent, I'm okay with people contributing and pushing issues because we have the right to peacefully assemble and redress the government. That's there. But I don't think candidates should be owned by anyone. I'm against slavery in all forms, right? We shouldn't have congresspeople, senators, and congressmen who owe their existence to $1 million backer. We have a vice president who was essentially paid for by as a senator by a guy who's got a founding in a technology company that now is the #1 place that almost every defense contract goes to for an answer. He's been promoted to vice president. That's not the vision. We need to have people who are holding offices be solely allegiance to the voters in their district, or in this case, the state, not special interest.
Let me ask. So, former Congressman Justin Amash out of Michigan, a while back, he did a town hall with people in his district, the district that he served in. And he was talking about, as a Republican, he said, if the Republicans see that you're not voting with them enough, they sideline you, they kick you off committees, so on and so forth. As an independent, I presume that this would be even more challenging because now you're you're not, maybe bucking the system in a sense. You're not voting the way that they would like you to vote, either of the parties, but also you're not a member of the party. So I would presume, reasonably, I think, that you would also be sidelined in some way if you won and were kind of bucking the system. So how do you get around being sidelined like that, where, these kind of changes that you would like to make maybe don't even, get to committee, or they get to committee if they do, but you're not there to kind of advocate for them. How do you get around that?
Well, first of all, Justin Amash is one of the best congressmen that we've had in Congress in many years, and I hope his political career is not over, that he comes back in some form or fashion into the future. I'm prepared to work with Democrats and Republicans if it enhances liberty and freedom, if it reduces the size of the federal government, that puts agency back in the lives of citizens to control their own property, their own life, their own body. Uh, I will work with both sides.
Hmm.
But I guess the question is, how's the committee working out for you? The committee system working out for you? Has it produced liberty and freedom and limited government for this country? It's time somebody bucked that system, and I
Hmm.
would be prepared to buck that system. If you were to be so fortunate to convince Texans to send you up there, you would get an audience unlike that we probably not seen, right? It would be people wondering, why did Texans do this, and
Hmm.
worried about, is their state going to do it next to them. So I think there are patriots in Congress that could be appealed to join a broad reform movement. It's just a matter of who steps out and takes the first arrow in the back. If you're getting them in the back, that means you're out front. I'm prepared to do that. Do I look like I'm wanting a new career? I'm I'm at a point where I've got little to lose, and this country has a lot to gain by doing some things differently, and I want to carry that message.
All right. Let me ask you one more question on these 18 items. Are they severable? That is, would citizens see any benefit if less in any number less than 18 were to pass? If you, of course, went on to be the senator and were able to convince them, which I understand is an uphill battle. But would citizens, could they say, oh, well, you know what? Even if we don't get all 18, 1, 3, 5, 10, that's all going to work. Like, are they designed in that way so that any one of them would still bring an impact, a measurable, very clear impact to citizens?
Absolutely. It, Individually, each one would be a great advance for liberty, smaller government, more freedom for the individual citizen. So let's
Mhm,
take term limits, for example.
mhm,
Term limits is one of the elements on the Convention of States application. Um, Senator Cruz, the Texan senator here, every term goes in and introduces an amendment that says, let's have term limits. Let's have a limit of two Senate and three House,
mhm,
which is interesting because he ran on term limits and then has proceeded to become a little bit hypocritical because he's now on his third term, and his amendment actually says the limitation shouldn't go into effect until it's fully ratified, signifying that he potentially would go for two more,
mhm,
or a total of 30 years. So term limits would be beneficial. Um, there's an organization out there called Term Limit Congress, and they kind of picked up on the Cruz Amendment. Personally, I think we ought to have a debate about that. Three 2-year terms in the House
mhm,
would is really dangerous from my standpoint. Let's have an open discussion before we commit to that. That would imply that the incoming Speaker of the House, at most would have 4 years of experience in that
mhm,
body, potentially going up against a president that already has 6 years, over in the executive branch. The balance of power between those two nominally co-equal branches is already skewed tremendously. The president has at his disposal, federal agencies and an armed forces of 2.5 million people. I'm very much for restoring the balance, in Congress, reaching out and grabbing its constitutional role that it was envisioned to have.
Mhm.
Term limits would be awesome, but we have to not end up with unintended consequences by just doing one thing. If you went as short as three house terms, what you would end up with little to no experience in federal government, and the executive bureaucracy would clearly be in charge. I
Mhm.
don't know if Senator Cruz's amendment is focused on that because he intends to run for president and he wants even more power, or what. But yeah, but if you so, I would definitely call for turnover in Congress, but some seniority and experience so that Congress can maintain, its co-equal responsibilities. But there are other ways in which I would, in effect, term limit.
Mhm.
One of the amendments calls for the elimination of all gerrymandering. In
Mhm.
other words, why do politicians get to pick their voters? Why don't we simply, we've got computers, you can do it without computers, but in a day, a good programmer, I know a little bit about technology,
Mhm.
could easily produce a program that said, based on population, zip codes, let's just build contiguous zip zone congressional districts, and let's have somebody represent neighborhoods as opposed to gerrymandered. How many have voted this way? How many of this race? How many of this religion? Um, we keep getting divided up in ways that are not normal and not intentional. So if we had uh, computer generated or automated generated congressional districts, and we rotated the start point, right? You wouldn't want to start in
Mhm.
the same point because you'd always get the same district. But every 6 years, let's rotate 90 degrees and let's come up with a new definition. You would get Congress people who are qualified and competent and make contributions and have good ideas and energy. They would survive, and the deadwood would get washed out. So there are multiple ways that we could improve the quality of Congress. My balanced budget amendment, I talk about let's have a balanced budget amendment with teeth. First
Mhm.
of all, we rarely get 12 appropriations bills each year done, right? We
Mhm.
work on continuing resolutions. We send Doge in, and it cuts, and 2 weeks later we get a continuing resolution that restores everything back. Let's go to a 2-year budgeting cycle, one per Congress, over a three three term cycle. Let's get to a balanced budget because it's not going to be done overnight. One third, one third, one third, and then once we get to a point where we require a balanced budget, um, if Congress can't achieve that, because that's their
Mhm.
primary job. Their primary job is to raise appropriate levels of revenue and then set spending priorities. If they can't do that, then they should be fired. We should
Right.
put Congress in what I call a caretaker status. It's a little bit of a take on the parliamentary no confidence vote, but we
Mhm.
shouldn't be so arrogant to think that we got everything right in 1783, right? We made huge advances, I think, with our governmental structures, the best the world's ever known, but it's not perfect. If we said, look, if you can't do your job, we're going to call new elections. And by the way, a half of the House, half of the Senate, and either the president or the vice president won't be eligible. But put their name in a hat and draw a lottery. We could quickly concentrate the focus of the members of Congress to say, look, you have to get along and work with each other to to produce legislation and spending plans that are consistent with this country's priorities. Uh, Congress people love to go and spend my grandchildren's future.
Mhm.
If you look at the numbers, it's horrendous. It's unsustainable, and no one has had the courage to address it. So I'm calling for it to be addressed in a serious and fundamental way that says, let's balance the budget, let's live within our means, or if you can't do it, we'll find somebody who can. Who else gets a job, doesn't do it, and then draws a paycheck?
Right. Right. Absolutely. Okay. So let me ask you this then. So you've got these 18 ideas and they look interesting. They also look, I think, in some way a little bit complex. Like number one, you kind of have to understand how the system is operating currently. Then you have to understand, okay, how would the system operate under these ideas, and then what would the benefit be? I think that sounds nice, but also sounds a bit complex in a world where people are accustomed to sound bites. They're accustomed to rage baiting, just politicians promising the world, making everything simplified. How do you, when you're talking to like the regular person, not a podcast bro, not fellow senators, you're just out there on the trail, you're talking to somebody and they're struggling with their groceries or they're struggling with whatever. How do you convince them that this is the platform that they want to support and you're the guy and their life will be better in some way, or at least there will be some, like there's a vision for how their life will be better. How do you have that conversation with them?
I have a conversation that tries to relate a specific reform component to their life. For example, balanced budget. I mean, when we can't balance the budget, what we do is we have to go through the Fed and print money to finance governmental operations. That causes inflation. That inflation is what they see when they go to the grocery store. So I try to make a relationship between the reform requirement and the thing in their everyday life that impacts them. And most of them get it. It was very interesting. Um, I was sitting here yesterday, and when I get a little ding when somebody goes to the website and they make a donation. And yesterday, one dinged, and I looked at it, and it was a really small amount. But when I opened it up, it said student, and I go, well, that's interesting. Why is some student out here making a contribution to a libertarian, relatively unknown guy that wants to come in and fix and clean things up? And so I just picked up the phone and called him, and he said, look, he said, this country is in bad shape. He said, I know I need to get involved. I need to find out who has a vision to fix things. And he literally said, I would look at Cornyn and said, look, the guy's been there. He's had his chance. I looked at Ken Paxton. He's got his own set of problems.
Mhm.
He said, I think I actually probably voted for your opponent, Ted Brown, in the previous one. He said, but when I saw your vision of how to clean Washington up, he said, that's my guy. So that was refreshing. Yeah, I wish it happened more,
Mhm.
but the message resonates. This government isn't working for us anymore. It's working against it. We're what I call modern day serfs. We're kind of in this feudalistic system where there's an elite power structure controlling, all the resources of this country, enriching themselves, and we're down here struggling. Young families, they're delaying getting married, which means they're delaying having kids.
Mhm.
What the average age now, the first time home owner is 40 years old.
Hmm.
Wow, I think I was 24 when I bought my first home. The American dream is slipping away, and people are looking for someone that says it's time to fix it. So I try to relate the reform component to something real in their lives.
Gotcha. Let's shift over to some of your policies. Stepping away from the bill of reform, which sounds interesting. Of your policies, which I would say are your maybe top two that you talk to with voters and that resonate with them outside of the bill of reform?
Um, Immigration
Okay.
is a policy. Let's just go there. It's a hot button idea, hot button in the country right now. First of all, this is the nation of immigrants. I mean, we were all immigrants at some point. I may go back to 6 or 7 generations here in Texas, but that doesn't mean my forefathers didn't come from Europe.
Mhm.
So immigration is a hot topic. I believe in borders. I believe every country has a right to its own character and culture. There are libertarians who believe in open borders. Um, that's also a George Soros view. And George
Okay.
Soros, in his life, would mean government kind of controls and runs your life from top to bottom. So I
Mhm.
don't square. I don't know how libertarians who open borders can square that with the vision that comes from that side. That seems to be completely kind of oxymoron. So I believe that we have a right to know who is in the country. The world is a complex place.
Hmm.
It's not 1880 or 1892 when Ellis Island was formed, right?
Hmm.
When people showed up, I know my opponent wants an Ellis Island like system. Um, when people showed up in 1890s, the early 20th century, they were largely coming from cultures that had similar worldviews in terms of Judeo-Christian. We believe in the individual. We want opportunity, separation in church and state, the right to be in charge of your own life.
Hmm.
Um, that's not the case anymore. If we just opened the doors, this country would be quickly overwhelmed with people who have no intention of assimilating into this culture, who may ultimately believe that the church and the state should be the same thing, and that concerns me. So I am for compassionate. First of all, we should eliminate the people who were flooded into this country. I think by design, by the last administration, who simply was looking to replace their voter base because they've in many cases they've lost their hold on the Latino and Black communities. They talk a good game, but their policies haven't delivered and lifted those sectors up as well as you would think they would, given all the attention. But they focused on certain sectors, certain communities when it's time to vote, and then they forget them. So I think we should remove people who came in with criminal records, people who have got orders for deportation. Where was the outrage when Laken Riley or Jocelyn Nungary were murdered? Right, the right wing noise machine did its thing, but there were
Hmm.
no mobs in the streets. There were no massive protests and physical fights, etc. The violence mostly comes from the left in this country. So my immigration policy says, look, we need borders. It's a dangerous world. We have the right to vet those and to ensure that those people who want to come in should come in, provided they share a vision of the American culture. And they're prepared to learn the language. They're prepared to assimilate and make a contribution. If you're coming in so you can draw a welfare check or some other benefits immediately, we don't need that. We're already drowning in debt. So, but once we do that, I don't think we will nor should, remove 15 million people from this country who are here for the right reasons. But we need a way to vet them. We need a way to create a path ultimately for citizenship without penalizing those who have done it the right way and come in, through a contract, such as I mentioned. So we ought to be compassionate and welcome new immigrants who come here for the right reasons. We shouldn't be, in the family separation business, but we have a right to maintain an American culture. So immigration that's balanced, I think, appeals to most citizens. One of the things that I've learned is that extremes are rarely the right decision is rarely found on the extreme of the spectrum, right? It's usually not always this way or always that way. It's some balance of the two.
So let me ask you, it's okay. So that was a lot there. I'm gonna try to break it down a little bit for my question. So we have uh, we have on one hand, you're saying like, hey, we have the right to preserve our culture, however we define that, and then you're saying, hey, we should continue with deportations, right, or at least in some way, correct? You are supporting deportations, like mass
Deportation.
deportation.
Well, you're not going to pull me into the mass deportation. I think
Okay.
people who have proven through, have a criminal record, have committed crimes here, or potentially wanted in other countries for violent crimes,
Hmm.
we should get them out of this country.
Okay. Okay.
On the other hand, there are many people, and I believe the vast majority of the folks who are here without documentation did come for the right reason. We need to verify that, and then we need to create a path for them to have some type of a legal status, maybe something that doesn't exist in a perfect format today. it is extremely dangerous to create or to allow to continue a situation in which there's, let's say, 15 million people living in the shadows, right? That's a
Right.
formula for coercion and abuse that ultimately doesn't lead to good outcomes. We need to be cognizant of that. So
Gotcha. So,
I'm not for, let's round up, 15 million people and send them back. Let's
got
figure
it.
out who's here for the right reasons. Let's welcome them. Let's ensure they're self-sufficient in making contributions, and let's get them integrated into the society.
Okay.
But on the other hand, there is a question about how many we can
Mhm.
absorb. For every million people that we say are impoverished around the world that we welcome into our shores, let's say on an annual basis, there's probably 80 million get created. The numbers don't add up. One of the things that we need to do is we need to foster civil, constructive, stable societies in other countries so that they will feel comfortable staying there, building and
Mhm.
participating in their own culture. When I go to France, I want to experience French culture. When I go to Germany, I want to experience Germany. If I go to the Middle East, I want to experience Middle East. This idea that everybody should just homogenize. I personally don't see that's the right outcome.
Got it.
Um,
So let me continue down that line of thinking because I want to ask you. And I'm just trying to make sure that I'm getting it clear before I ask my question. So, not mass deportations, but hey, if you have committed a violent crime here, we boot you, which I'm totally fine with. No issues there. But if somebody has been here, if I understand you correctly, if somebody has been here, say 10 years, they came here illegally, but they're otherwise contributing to society. Perhaps they've learned the language, so on and so forth. The things that most Americans would say, this is what we expect out of people coming to the United States, then you're saying, hey, let's create a path for them to remain here legally, correct?
That's correct. And that,
Okay.
that means they have to have the ability to work. They have to have the ability to call the police and report a crime
Right.
when they
Right.
see it. They should not. We cannot leave people in the shadows. That is unhealthy for this nation.
Right. But and I would presume then by whatever criteria, and you can even list out your criteria for what it would take to get here, like some immigrant comes in and they say, hey, I would like to come to the US, then we have some level of criteria that they have to meet in order for us to permit them in, to make sure that they're somebody that's going to be contributing to this society and not doing anything else. Um, isn't that though, like if that's the approach we take, isn't that basically an Ellis Island style?
Um, Ellis Island said anybody who showed up,
Well,
irrespective
you
of their
you well, you couldn't come here if you had communicable
tuberculosis.
disease, or if
Exactly.
you were a violent criminal, if they somehow
Right.
known you to be a violent
Yeah.
criminal, then you were turned away. So then there's other criteria. So what would those other criteria then look like for you?
But in 1892, when Ellis Island was open, this was a vast continent,
Mhm, mhm.
unpopulated. We're already struggling with resources and water and power grid and other things. So we have to be careful about just opening the doors and inviting anybody who wants to
Sure.
just come in at any scale, right? There's just a rate at which we can absorb people that is consistent with maintaining the standard of life and quality
Mhm.
that we've developed and sacrificed for. I mean, a lot of people for centuries now have spent a lot of blood and treasure to generate this culture and society, and we have a right and obligation to maintain it and pass it on.
Right, and
Um,
what does the vetting look like when somebody comes to the door, the hypothetical door of the US? What does that vetting look like? What are we looking for beyond, their medical status? Like, are you relatively healthy? You don't have tuberculosis or something crazy. You're not a violent criminal. And then what? What else would be on the list that for you?
for me, you have to be committed to the American ideal
Mhm,
of a free and open society that's based on individual rights, separation of church and state, a capitalist system
mhm.
where you're rewarded for your own efforts. You have to be prepared to be self-sufficient as opposed to immediately demand a bunch of entitlements and handouts. You have to come and demonstrate that you're going to be a contributing member, prepared to assimilate and grow this country and further refine our democracy, not come in and undermine it.
Gotcha. The requirements on being self-sustaining, those kind of things. I think there are reasonable ways for which we could verify that. We could say, hey, like you could ask somebody, like, do you have a bank account? Do you have money? Something like that. We could also just simply cut off programs here in the U.S. But for some of the more, it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like there's some more ideological ideas that you have in mind, like, hey, you're here to support separation of church and state. You're here to support some of these other cultural things that we have built up over time. How do we verify those? Do we just ask a question, or is there a verification process that says this person actually believes it?
Yeah, it's difficult to ascertain with any degree of finality, but I think we make it clear that that's what we expect.
Hmm.
I was at a meeting in Travis County. Ted Brown was in seeing it, and there was a guy who started out, wasn't getting the best vibe, but by the end of my discussion, he said, when I came in as an immigrant, my family did, we actually signed a contract where we committed to assimilate, we committed to learn the language. He said, and a lot of these people just coming across, I mean, they're just willy-nilly coming across with no expectation, not having, been through a process that tried to vet them. And so he was more open. But yeah, I think we clearly lay out what America stands for,
Hmm.
and that you're for in return for access, you're committing to comply and participate in this culture. Where you're not coming in to try to change this culture to something else.
Gotcha. Okay. I know we're getting close to our time. Is there anything that I missed that you really want voters, and be it just the general public or libertarians who will be going to the convention? I believe it's in April. Um,
In April.
is there anything that I missed or that we didn't talk about that you want them to know? And then after that, I do have one question from the audience.
Okay. Yeah, I'm a regular citizen who's been involved and aware for my whole life. Um, we're at a point where we need to make some serious adjustments to the way our governmental processes run,
Hmm.
and that we can't punt it down the road any longer. And I'm prepared to break with the pack
Hmm.
and deliver a reform message and stick to my guns until I get a majority that will work with me to fix things. Yeah, I'm a pragmatic problem solver who's not ideological, that simply believes that there's been way too much sacrifice in this country for far too many years to simply let it slip away through apathy and just simply unwillingness to confront our challenges.
Gotcha. And then here's that question from the audience. Joe asked, he says, what is your first bill that you're going to file if and when elected to U.S. Senate?
The first bill would be a balanced budget amendment.
Okay. All
Yep.
right. Sounds good. Then
because
there you have it,
because
folks. First bill. Go
because
ahead and
that
explain it if you
because
want.
out of that flows everything else. If
Mm.
government had to live within its means, what would naturally fall away, right? All the regulations, all of the agencies that are on the periphery that control so much of our life, those would be the first to go. We would get liberty by simply controlling the financial components of government.
Gotcha. All
So
right.
that's
Sounds
why
good.
it's really important.
Sounds good, sir. All right. Tell people how they can find you and support you.
Well, I haven't spent my life on social media,
Hmm.
but
You're better off.
I'm learning that process. So they can find me on Twitter or X at Mark Sims Texas Liberty. They can find me Daniel Sims on Facebook. I kind of got caught in one of those Jimmy Carter things where he wasn't quite sure, was it the legal name, because my name is Daniel Mark,
Right.
and I'm in Facebook purgatory at the moment. I
Mm.
think I've got a few more days before I can change that back to Mark, which is what I've always been more or less known by as my middle name. And then they can go to simsfortexas.org. That's the website that lays out the vision of more liberty through reform to clean up the mess in Washington, and let's put this country on the path towards that's more consistent with the individual, or original, I guess, founder's vision than where we're at today. So any one of those three places, they'll be able to find me.
Awesome. And if you, after the show, if you send me those additional links, I will add them to your campaign site in the show notes for me.
I will gladly do that.
So thank you, sir. All right, sir. That's the end of our time. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. I appreciated having that conversation. Good luck to you as you go on in April to the convention. May the best man win, based on however the libertarians in Texas so choose. I'm going to put you backstage if you want to stick around and we can chat for a minute after. That's fine. Otherwise, if you need to go, that's fine as well. But again, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you for letting me share my vision. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. All right, folks, there you have it. Mark Sims. And if you want to go back, you can go and check out the episode with Ted Brown. And you can, if you're a libertarian in Texas and you're trying to figure out who you want to support, I've interviewed them both. So hopefully there's enough information there for you to make a choice if you haven't made one already. But for now, that's a wrap for this episode. I hope you found it informative and inspiring. Please do me a favor. Come back by later. Drop a comment in with your thoughts. Let me know if I missed something. Maybe there was a better question that I should have asked. Whatever the case, I'm all ears. But with that being said, folks, I am out. I will see you again tomorrow. Have a good one. You know that I'm all about supporting organizations that hold my values. Make sure you head on over to blackgunsmatter.shop. They've got apparel, stickers, and more. Use the code LibertyDad, all one word, at checkout to score a 10% discount. Or just hit the referral link in the show notes. That'll make it so much easier. Remember, I'm not just a voice on a mic. I'm a dad who's working hard to deliver to you the best libertarian content. Connect with me on Linktree, where you'll find links to my Patreon and buy me a coffee, because, every bit helps keep this show rolling. Plus, you can find me on my other platforms to stay in the loop. With your help, this show, The Message of Liberty, will be seen and heard by more people. As always, I appreciate you tuning in and look forward to seeing you in the next episode.